My name is Norm Josem. I'm the Vice President of the Ripton Historical Society, and Charles asked me if I would just open things here. So I'd like to welcome you all to the dedication, the official dedication of the Piers Tavern site, historical site, and the new additions that the Forest Service has made to the trail system here that accesses this point and connects the wayside with the interpretive trail.
What was the historical significance of the Calvin Pier Tavern? Going back a couple centuries, in 1819, Esther and Calvin Pier and their 7 children were living on this site, which is on lot 37, which was then in the foundation is described by this cellar hole. The large pile of stones within the cellar hole is believed to have been the base and some of the structure of this building's large center fireplace. 1 year later, in November 1820, Ripton annexed the northern 6,000 acres of Goshen, making the Piers residents of Ripton. Had Ripton not acquired this Goshen land, the site, Joseph Patel's Breadloaf Inn and Middlebury College's summer campus would today be in Goshen. The Piers Farm in Woodlands and encompassed all the land that is occupied by Robert Frost Interpretive Trail and Robert Frost Wayside, now described by the Forest Service as Robert Frost Recreation. The Homer Noble Robert Frost Farm was also Pier property until 1820, when Calvin Pier sold the south 50 acres of lot 76 to Parson Billings. Parson Billings' granddaughter, Eunice Billings Noble, sold the farm to Robert Frost in 1939. The Piers Ripton home was built close by the old Center Turnpike, now Route 125. The turnpike was constructed by the Center Turnpike companies, whose original owners and officers were Elias Keyes of Stockbridge, Gamaliel Painter, president, and Daniel Chipman, clerk. Turnpike construction commenced at the courthouse in Middlebury in 1801 and reached Hancock between 1803 and 1805. I'm uncertain of the exact date when it got to Hancock. The strategic location of the Piers home and barn here offered weary travelers and their horses a refuge along this rugged mountain road, and by offering hospitality, the Piers were able to earn hard cash year-round. This road probably would have been no wider than one horse and buggy could travel. The fact that the Piers opened their home to the public for dining and lodging was first documented by an 1826 tax warning in the Vermont Republican and American Journal, which advised those whose land was in tax arrears to pay up, otherwise their property was to be auctioned. Quote, at the dwelling house of Calvin Pier, innkeeper, in said town of Ripton, unquote. Other publications have referred to the Piers establishment as a tavern, and that's the terminology that we've used to represent it here. Today, we celebrate Calvin Pier's Tavern for several reasons. It was the first frame building in Ripton. Daniel Chipman's house in Ripton Village, now called Chipman Inn, which was built in 1828, was the second frame building. All prior dwellings in Ripton, beginning in 1809, were log homes. But most importantly, the Piers Tavern was the location of Ripton's first town meeting, held on March 3, 1828. Calvin Pier was elected Ripton's first town clerk, and Daniel Chipman its first moderator. Prior to 1828, Ripton was basically a gore, still operating under its 1781 charter from the Republic of Vermont. Ripton's 1828 town meeting was a milestone that afforded Ripton the same standing as every other organized Vermont town, allowing it to self-govern, to retain its own records, and to elect its own representative to serve the town's interests in the Vermont legislature. The Piers sold the Ripton Tavern in 1835, then moved westward to become pioneers again as founders of Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, but that's a whole other story. Mortgage lender Albert Whitcomb of Stockbridge was the 11th owner of the Pier farm. It's non-resident owner from 1871 to 1889, leasing out the property when possible over that 18-year period. And it was a period in which Ripton, there were many foreclosures. It was the so-called Long Depression, and Ripton suffered it longer than many areas. So it was probably during this time that insufficient resources were allocated to the town. So that by the time John Pierce became the tavern's 12th owner in 1889, the building was beyond repair. The following year, in November, a Ripton news reporter submitted the following to the Middlebury Register. John C. Pierce is taking down the old house that was originally built by Calvin Pier so long ago that no one can give the year. It was erected in the town of Goshen, but a change of lines brought it into this town. It was the first frame house in our borders. Joseph Patel purchased the Pier property in 1897, and it was part of the 30,000 acres built to Middlebury College upon his death in 1915. And Middlebury College sold it to the Forest Service in 1936. I guess it was actually the agricultural department at that time. So this is the end of my historical reckoning, but I would like to mention how grateful Ripton Historical Society is for the extraordinary cooperation and hands-on work that has been provided by the US Forrest Service. In 2018 or 2019, following the cleaning of headstones at Calvin Cemetery, about half a mile up the road, with a group of volunteers organized by US Forest Service archaeologist David Lacey, I persuaded David and his entourage to stop here at a very overgrown cellar hole, and was encouraged by their enthusiasm of someday pursuing this as a historic site. David would have been here today, but he fell downstairs at home and is staying put while his back recovers. In January 2020, on behalf of Ripton Historical Society, I wrote to David with some details of Calvin Pier's history in Ripton and asked if he could help move things forward to get the Pier Tavern cellar hole recognized and cleaned up. Even though David had by then retired from the Forest Service, he conveyed the historical importance of the site to Chris Matrick, Phil McCaskill, Karen Birch, and others. Wonderfully, they agreed that the Calvin Pier site warranted preservation and saw to it that the new connector trail, then in the planning stage, would pass right in front of the cellar. The first on-site work was done in July 2020 by Vermont Youth Conservation Corps under the guidance of Karen Birch, Phil McCaskill, Evan Kelly, and Elizabeth Valentine. For the first time, we could then see the foundation stone. It's already been mentioned that Ripton Historical Society sponsored the sign, and it was perfectly executed by Whitman. And Gary was here too with Forest Service personnel in November 2021 to install it. The Youth Conservation Corps came back again in September 2022 to liberate the barn foundation from vegetation, and Phil has had them back this year too to keep undergrowth in check. And this spring, David Lacey's former technician, Eric Bowman, met me here. The barn foundation at that time was a swimming pool, but he located the water well, which is just 100 feet or so in that direction. Thank you everyone for showing up on this cold Halloween day to commemorate the 2 centuries old Calvin Pier Tavern that ushered in Ripton's self-government. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Chris Matrick. I'm the district ranger for the Rochester and Middlebury Ranger Districts on the Green Mountain National Forest. I'm a botanist by trade, though, and I studied recreation management at the University of Vermont, and I can remember way back when I wasn't as gray, coming down here as part of some of my recreation planning classes to the Robert Frost Interpretrive site and looking at it as an example of, how to construct and manage recreation on public land. And then we had the Robert Frost Wayside here, and then the Robert Frost Interpretrive site over there, and no way to connect the two aside from walking on the road, which isn't very safe. And then that hatched this idea of this connector trail between the interpretive site and the wayside. Parking can be an issue there sometimes, so that gave us some additional parking over here and another opportunity for accessible trails on the National Forest. And then I believe I believe it was Charles who rang me up and talked about the Calvin Pier site, which we knew was here, but it was very overgrown at that time. And we started the discussions about, could we bring the trail past the site? Could we have an interpretive sign that would be installed that will tell the tale of this location? And so over the intervening years, probably 3 or 4 years, we went from just an idea to the trail being installed, the sign being produced, which is lovely. And then this dedication today, despite the first try at it, which was pretty rainy, and then Ripton sort of had a roller coaster summer with weather and water. And I'm glad it wasn't yesterday that this was planned for, because we'd have been back to square one again. But just really happy for the partnership with the college and the Muslim Association and the Ripton Historical Society and the town of Ripton and Gary for producing the sign. It's just been it's been easy for us, and it's also enabled us to kind of refocus on these two archaeological sites, historic sites, and we are now maintaining them on an annual basis or as needed. We'll see. And Eric just today had an idea of, well, maybe we could run prescribed fire through here, and that might even further expose, so you get a real sense of what the foundation looks like, because it does grow out very quick. So thank you all very much.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you all for being here, and especially thank you to Charles for all of your work and for inviting me and letting me know about this to begin with. This is an amazing collaboration with the federal government, the private college, the state government, and local town. It makes me super proud that everybody could come together and work on it. And as some of you know, I love to go to historic site marker celebrations. My most recent one was in Middlebury for the Frederick Douglass sign, which is on the Court Green. If you haven't seen it, go see that one as well. But this is a really lovely tribute to the democracy that is so alive and well in the town of Ripton. And just want to thank everyone for being here and for including me in this celebration on this gorgeous Halloween day. Thank you.
So, again, I'm Mark Lappin. I work on the Middlebury College lands, and it's a real honor. I think I'm really passionate about land and conservation, all of nature, and connecting people to the land and the history of the land. And this is a fantastic way to do it. I just wish we had more of this kind of signage, more of this kind of historical information that really helps us understand some of the history. And of course, we could go farther and further back, and I hope at some point we do. But the college, the key word here is partnerships, and both Ruth and Chris talked about that a lot. But I think some of our major partners are here, and as a budding landowner, really fortunate to have received the gift from Joseph Patel. Take the land and conservation and wise stewardship seriously, and some of you may know there is a conservation easement. All of the abutting college lands here, all of the lands in Ripton will eventually have conservation easement. But there's 4 main goals of that. The first one is what all conservation easements do, and that's preventing development. So it won't be paved over. It will be forever some kind of natural. Then we have maintaining in a relatively natural condition that which is now relatively natural. So basically letting nature grow with some really minor modifications now and then that have to be decided upon through a lengthy process with Vermont Land Trust if we decide to do any manipulations. And of course, the outdoor recreation. I'm here in this area myself and my family, almost weekly through the winter and lots of times in the summer also. So these lands of the college, abutting lands, forever open for recreation, outdoor recreation, and for education, the educational mission. I'm really inspired by this. Thank you all who put it together, because I want more signage on the Breadloaf campus so that people really understand some of this history. And I realize that when I do get that signage put together, one of my former students did work with Charles to get some things, but I better run it past you before we go to final print, because I don't want to have anything incorrect in there or said in the wrong way. So, thank you all for working on this.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Nathan Billings, Charles' son, and I work as the web and technology manager for the Ripton Historical Society. I was just thinking maybe I have the opportunity to briefly speak about maybe my generation and what it means to us. I think maybe we all remember a time where we've probably been on a walk like this as kids, and you know, there's a sign like this, and maybe we weren't all lucky enough to have poetry, and it's kind of fun on face value, but as kids it doesn't really sink in, right? And so you make that transition slowly. I'm in my late 20s, going on 30, just had my first child, and you know, life's too busy. I'm about to rush back and get back to work after this, and you know, sometimes it takes kind of the fighting urge from someone such as the president to get me here and to get this sign built during a time when I don't have enough time to care, but I do want to care, as opposed to being too young to understand to care. And eventually, you know, that kind of sets the cornerstone for caring the way that all of you folks do, and reaching that stage of life and wanting to be involved as much as possible and having the time to do so. So even though we can't all express our appreciation, I'm trying as my generation now to say this matters to us eventually, even if we can't express it in the moment. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you. Glad to have representatives of other historical societies here as well. Thank you very much for coming. I hope we can reciprocate and come to your events too. So we know you'll keep it in the forefront. So enjoy a few moments together before we disperse and get to know folks, and then come back for the next event, and we'll see you on the trails.